We're going to be taking a deep dive into women's participation in the global workforce.
Oh, yeah.
We've got this incredible analysis here called Women's Global Labor Force Participation, a comprehensive analysis. And they've given us so much to unpack.
Yeah.
They've even included this really, really cool visual, a world map, where each country is shaded to reflect its female labor participation rate.
I love that.
Data on the screen, numbers come alive. Male, female flows where the patterns thrive. Visual charts, public colors unify. Gender decoded, bringing truth to light. Small drum fill. We break it down, real talk. Trends unveiling, facts from every block. Here's your insight, watch the data glide. Gender decoded, let the beats collide.
It's amazing how much you can learn about the world just by looking at how women participate in the workforce.
Exactly. And one of the things that really stood out to us was this map.
Oh, yeah, the map.
It's a world map.
Yeah.
But instead of showing political boundaries, it uses color to show how many women are working in different countries. Have you seen this?
Oh, yeah, it's pretty striking, right? All those different colors just jump out at you.
It is. I mean, you go from like vibrant blues to really stark reds. So what is it about those colors? What are we supposed to be seeing?
Well, the colors represent the percentage of women who are actively part of the workforce in each country.
Yeah.
So you can get a really quick sense of where women are really engaged in paid work and where they're, well, less so.
And that's just scratching the surface, right? Because it's not just about numbers. It's about understanding the forces that shape those numbers.
Exactly. Like, what's the history behind those numbers? What are the cultural factors at play?
Yeah. Our source material, it talks a lot about industrialization as a turning point.
Right. Think about it. As countries transitioned from being mostly agricultural to more industrialized, new kinds of jobs started popping up everywhere. But it's not like that happened all at the same time everywhere.
So how did the timing of industrialization play into all of this?
Well, for example, in places like Western Europe and North America, industrialization happened earlier and it kind of went hand in hand with social reforms.
So women had more opportunities opening up for them.
Exactly. But other regions, they industrialized much later, so the path for women in those societies was very different.
That makes sense. So we're already starting to see how history kind of ripples through time and affects the present.
Totally. And let's not forget culture, right?
Right. Because it's not just about jobs. It's about the whole social context. Like, what's expected of women in different cultures?
Huge point. Sometimes cultural expectations are way more powerful than any laws on the books. They really influence how women are seen, what opportunities they have, and whether they can even imagine themselves working outside the home.
And that brings us to laws and policies. The report, it actually spends quite a bit of time talking about things like maternity leave and laws against discrimination.
Right. Those kinds of policies, they can either make it a lot easier for women to work or make it a lot harder.
It's like they're setting the rules of the game, in a way.
Totally. Think about it. If a woman can take paid time off after having a baby, she's much more likely to go back to work.
It makes it possible to balance work and family.
Exactly. And then there's the whole issue of discrimination. Without strong protections in place, women can face all sorts of barriers in the workplace.
Okay, so we've got this map, we've got the history, we've got the culture, we've got the laws. But let's actually zoom in on some specific regions and see what's going on, because some of those colors on the map, they're really attention-grabbing.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like those bright red zones. They really stand out.
Exactly. We're looking at places like the Middle East and North Africa, where the rates of women working are really low. So what's happening there?
It's complicated, and you have to remember that every place is unique. But often in those regions, you see a kind of combination of things happening at the same time. Like there can be very strong traditional views about women's roles.
And those traditions often limit what women can do.
Right, and they might face legal barriers too. And then in a lot of these places, there simply aren't that many opportunities available to women, even if they want to work.
So it's a combination of factors.
Right.
Okay, let's move on to the lighter and medium blue areas on the map. We're looking at regions like Central and Eastern Europe, parts of Asia and Africa. What are we seeing there?
So in a lot of these places, women really need to work to help support their families.
It's an economic necessity.
Yeah, and it can be tough. Things like childcare can be really hard to find or really expensive.
Which makes it almost impossible for women to work, even if they want to or need to.
Exactly. So even though you see more women working in these regions compared to those red zones, there are still a lot of challenges.
Okay, so we've got the red zones, we've got the lighter blues. Now let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum, to those deep blue areas, the ones that really pop out.
Yeah, those are the Nordic countries. They always stand out on this map.
They do. And that's because they have some of the highest rates of women working anywhere in the world. What are they doing differently?
Well, a lot of people point to what's called the Nordic model. In those countries, they've really made gender equality a priority.
So it's not just talk. They actually back it up with policies and programs.
Yeah, like they have amazing social welfare programs. They have state-supported childcare that's really affordable. They have really generous parental leave policies.
Wow. So they're really removing those barriers that we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. And they also have strong laws against discrimination. So it's really like they've created this whole environment where women can have both a career and a family.
That's incredible. Their success really makes you wonder why other countries aren't following their lead more. But I guess it's not always that simple, right?
Right. There are always cultural and political factors to consider. And, even though the Nordic countries are kind of the gold standard, there are other parts of the world where you see lots of women working. It's just that the reasons might be different.
Oh, like where?
Well, like in parts of Africa, for example, women have always played a huge role in agriculture and in local markets. So you see a lot of women working, but it's often in the informal sector, so it doesn't always get counted in the official statistics.
So the map isn't telling the whole story in those cases.
Exactly. It's just one piece of the puzzle. And here's another thing that really struck me when I was looking at this report. Even in places where women are really well educated, they often don't join the workforce at the same rates as men.
Why is that? I mean, you'd think education would be the key.
Well, it's complicated, but part of it has to do with what are called structural biases. These are kind of like hidden barriers that women face even when they have the same qualifications as men.
So even with a great education, there are still these invisible obstacles.
It's frustrating, right? Like women might be steered towards certain professions, like caring professions that tend to pay less, or they might face unconscious bias when it comes to promotions.
It's like an uphill battle even when you have all the tools. So this raises a really big question. What actually happens when more women are working? Does it actually make a difference?
Oh, it absolutely does. I mean, first and foremost, it means women have more control over their lives. They have more financial independence, more decision-making power.
It's about empowerment.
Exactly. But it goes beyond that. When women work, it also benefits their families. It brings in more income, so there's more stability. And it can even help lift families out of poverty.
And that's just at the family level. What about the broader impacts on society?
Well, there's a ton of research showing that when more women work, it actually boosts economic growth for the whole country. I mean, everyone benefits.
That's not just a women's issue, it's an everyone issue.
Exactly. And, there's this idea out there that economic growth automatically leads to more jobs for women, but it's actually more nuanced than that.
Oh, how so?
Well, economic growth can definitely create more job opportunities overall, but you have to be intentional about making sure those opportunities are open to women. It's a two-way street, actually. The more women who are working, the more it can drive economic growth, too.
So it's not just about waiting for the economy to grow. It's about actively creating systems and policies that support women's participation.
Right. It's about making sure women have a seat at the table and a chance to contribute.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It has to be intentional. You can't just assume things will work out on their own.
That's a really good point. It makes you realize how much work still needs to be done. I mean, this map really drives home how everything's connected. The culture, the economics, the policies, it all plays a role.
And don't forget about cultural shifts. I mean, those can be slow, but they can really have a huge impact. You can look back in history and see countries that used to have really low rates of women working, but then things started to change. They started passing laws to give women more rights, they created programs to help women start businesses, and they really focused on educating girls.
So it's like those grassroots efforts, those changes in attitudes, they really start to build momentum.
Yeah, and it can have a ripple effect across generations.
It makes you think about the power of just a few people who are really committed to making a difference.
Totally. And speaking of making a difference, Can we circle back to those Nordic countries for a minute? With their super high rates of women working.
Oh yeah, I was really impressed by them. I
Yeah.
mean, is there anything the rest of the world can learn from them?
Well, they're definitely a good model to study. One of the reasons they've been so successful is that they're really committed to gender equality. It's not just something they talk about, it's part of their culture.
So it's like a deeply held value.
Yeah, and then on top of that, they invest a ton of money in social support systems like childcare and parental leave. And it's really high quality and really affordable.
So it actually makes it possible for women to work and have families.
Right, and that's huge. And then, of course, they also have those strong laws against discrimination, so women have a fair shot at getting ahead in their careers.
So it's like a whole package, the cultural piece, the support systems, the legal protections.
Exactly. They've really figured out how to create a system that works. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It is. Okay, so we've talked about some specific regions, but zooming out a bit, what are some of the main reasons we see such big differences in women's labor force participation around the world?
Well, like we've been talking about, laws and policies make a huge difference. Countries that have those family-friendly policies, laws that promote gender equality, good social safety nets, those countries tend to have higher rates of women working.
So basically, if you create a system that's supportive, women are more likely to participate.
Exactly. But you can't ignore the cultural and religious norms either. In some places, there are just really traditional views about women's roles, and those can be really hard to change.
So even if the laws change, sometimes those deep-seated attitudes can hold women back.
Right. It's not just about legal barriers. Sometimes it's about those social pressures, those expectations that have been around for generations.
It's a lot more complex than just passing a few laws. What about the economic structure of a country? Does that play a role?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like, if you think about countries that are still very agrarian, where a lot of people are farming or living in rural areas, women often play a really important role in agriculture or in small, informal businesses.
So their work is essential, but it's not always recognized.
Right. It might not be counted in the official statistics. And then on the flip side, you have countries with more industrialized or service-based economies. Those countries tend to have more formal jobs, both for men and women.
Which probably leads to higher participation rates.
Yeah, but it doesn't necessarily mean that women in those countries are facing fewer challenges. There can still be discrimination. There can still be a lack of opportunity.
So again, the numbers don't always tell the whole story.
Exactly. It's important to dig a little deeper. Are there any other factors you're wondering about?
Well, you mentioned earlier how history plays a role. Are there other things like that that kind of shape the landscape?
Well, two things come to mind. One is urbanization and education levels. As more people move to cities, women tend to have more access to different kinds of jobs. And as education levels rise, that also opens up more opportunities.
So basically, where you live and how much education you have, it could really make a difference.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And then the other thing, and this is really important, is to remember that global events can have a huge impact, too. Things like wars, political instability, natural disasters, all of those things can disrupt economies and societies and force women out of the workforce.
It's a reminder that progress isn't always a straight line. There can be setbacks, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's so important to keep fighting for policies that protect women's rights and economic opportunities, especially during times of crisis. We have to make sure that women don't get left behind.
It's about building resilience, making sure that all that progress doesn't just disappear.
Exactly. And this map that we've been talking about, it's not static, right? It's constantly changing. It's like a snapshot of a world that's in constant flux.
So all those patterns we see, all those colors, they're the result of so many different factors,
Right.
all these individual stories, all these policy decisions.
It's a reminder that the fight for gender equality, it's an ongoing process. It's not over. There's still so much work to be done.
But there's also so much to be hopeful for. I mean, we've seen all these examples of how things can change, how progress can be made.
Right. Even small changes can have a ripple effect. And I think that's what's so exciting about this whole topic. There's so much potential.
It's like a call to action. It's like, okay, what can we do to be part of this change to help make things better for women?
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's a question we should all be asking ourselves. What are the small things we can do in our own lives to support greater gender equality? Whether it's in our workplaces, our communities, or even just in our own families.
Every little bit counts.
Totally. And, at the end of the day, when women thrive, societies thrive. That's something we should never forget.
It's such a powerful message. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, but this is just the beginning, right? There's so much more to explore.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I hope this deep dive has inspired you to keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep those brains buzzing.
Absolutely. So as you keep exploring this topic, what are some of the things that have really stood out to you? What has really made you think?
Oh, so many things. It's hard to pick just one, but I think one of the most interesting things for me has been seeing how history, culture, and economics all kind of intersect on this map.
Mhm.
We can see the effects of industrialization, we can see how traditional ideas about gender roles are still playing out, and we can see how government policies can really make a difference. It's like this whole tapestry of factors.
It really highlights how interconnected the world is, doesn't it? Everything's linked. What else has been on your mind?
I think it's really important to remember that this map is not static. It's a snapshot in time. As the world changes, as countries develop, as attitudes evolve, that map is going to change too. It's a dynamic process.
Right, and progress isn't always linear. There can be setbacks, there can be challenges. For me, one of the biggest takeaways has been how important collective action is. We've seen so many examples of how grassroots movements, policy changes, and shifts in cultural attitudes can all work together to create real, lasting change.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that we all have a role to play. Every individual can make a difference. Every action, no matter how small, can contribute to a larger movement. Speaking of action, have any specific initiatives or organizations come to mind from you?
I was thinking about the power of microloans. How giving women in developing countries access to small loans can help them start their own businesses and gain financial independence. It's a simple idea, but it can have a huge ripple effect.
That's a great example. And there are so many other amazing organizations out there doing incredible work all around the world, working to improve access to education, advocating for better laws, providing support for women entrepreneurs.
It's inspiring to see so many people dedicated to creating a more just and equitable world.
It is. Before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, this idea that the benefits of greater gender equality in the workforce go far beyond just women themselves. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not just about individual women. It's about families, communities, and whole society's benefit.
Exactly. When more women are working, it can lead to greater economic growth, greater stability, families have more resources, it can help lift people out of poverty. We often see better health outcomes, better education outcomes for kids.
It's a win-win situation for everyone.
And it's not just about the economics either. Greater gender equality also leads to a more just and equitable society overall. It challenges those traditional gender roles. It brings more diverse perspectives to leadership positions. It helps to create a more inclusive culture.
So everyone benefits from a more balanced and just society.
Exactly.
Well, this deep dive has been truly eye-opening. I've learned so much, and I hope our listeners have too. I encourage everyone to keep exploring this topic, keep asking questions, keep the conversation going.
I agree. There's always more to learn. As we wrap up, is there one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Absolutely. We've talked about so many complex issues today, but I think the main takeaway is this. Look for opportunities to champion gender equality in your own life, whether it's in your workplace, your community, or by supporting organizations that are doing this work around the world. Every action, no matter how small, can make a difference. Remember, when women thrive, societies thrive. That's a future worth fighting for.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.